Welcome to tonight's bedtime story. As the soft snow whispers against the window pane, the world outside is wrapped in the peaceful silence of Christmas Eve. In the warmth of her home, Clara lies awake, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings of a mysterious gift. A nutcracker that seems to hold secrets of its own. Little does she know, this is the beginning of a magical journey that will take her beyond the ordinary, into a world where the heart of Christmas itself is at risk. Let the gentle sound of this tale guide you into a peaceful, restful sleep, where the magic of the season will carry you into dreams filled with hope and wonder. The snow whispered against the window pane, its delicate patterns glinting like frost-laden lace under the pale moonlight. Clara lay awake in the silence of Christmas Eve, her fingers tracing the grooves of an unfamiliar gift. A nutcracker toy that had appeared beneath the tree. She couldn't recall who had placed it there. Its presence was a mystery, and its carved face seemed to hold secrets of its own. The toy wasn't like the others. The craftsmanship was exquisite, almost lifelike, with fine etchings along its painted uniform and a small crack running along its jaw. Clara tilted her head, wondering why its expression, though fixed, carried a sorrowful weight. The house creaked faintly in the stillness, as if holding its breath. Somewhere distant, the grandfather clock began its midnight toll. Dong, dong, dong. The final chime reverberated through the room, stretching like an echo into another world. Clara blinked, suddenly aware of the changes around her. The Christmas tree, once modest in size, now loomed like a cathedral spire, its ornaments shimmering with an unearthly glow. The room, though familiar, felt strange. Elongated shadows stretched across the walls, and the air seemed heavy with expectation. And then, the nutcracker stirred. Clara gasped as the toy's joints creaked and shifted. Its painted eyes blinked, their wooden sheen giving way to an uncanny gleam. With a jerking motion, the nutcracker rose to its feet, wobbling slightly before steadying itself. Clara clutched the edge of her blanket, torn between awe and terror. "Do not fear," the nutcracker said, his voice low and warm, though it carried the rasp of disuse. He tipped his painted hat with a stiff bow. "I am in your service, my lady." Clara could only stare, her voice caught somewhere between her throat and her heart. Finally, she managed, "How are you alive?" The nutcracker's mouth curved into a solemn smile, the crack in his jaw shifting slightly. "Alive, yes," he murmured, as if testing the word. "Though not quite as you are. My name is unimportant for now, but I'm bound to protect this night. And you." Before Clara could respond, a chill crept into the room, colder than the snowstorm outside. The light of the ornaments dimmed as the shadows deepened. A sound like the scurrying of tiny claws rose from the edges of the room. Clara turned, her pulse quickening as she caught movement in the dark. Emerging from the corners were creatures, small at first, their shapes indistinct. Then, stepping into the dim glow of the tree's light, came a figure larger than the rest. The Mouse King. His crown gleamed atop his rodent head, a crooked thing of rusted gold, and his red eyes gleamed like embers. He stood tall, his matted fur rippling as he dragged his sharp claws along the floorboards. Around him, his minions, dozens of mice, gnawed and hissed, their teeth flashing in the faint light. "So," the Mouse King hissed, his voice a low snarl that filled the room. "The little soldier awakens. How quaint!" The Nutcracker stepped in front of Clara, his stiff frame suddenly imposing. "Leave this place," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "You do not belong here." The Mouse King laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, but I do. I am here for what's mine." His claw pointed to the tree, its ornaments now flickering like dying stars. "The heart of Christmas will be mine, and not even a wooden fool can stop me." Clara's mind reeled. The heart of Christmas? What was happening? She clutched the Nutcracker's arm, her voice trembling. "What is he talking about?" The Nutcracker glanced back at her, his expression grave. "It's a long story," he said. "But if he takes the heart, Christmas itself will fall into despair. I promise I'll explain more. But first..." He turned back to the Mouse King. "We fight." The Mouse King's eyes narrowed, and with a screech, he lunged forward, his army of mice following. The Nutcracker sprang into motion, his movements jerky but swift, wielding a small sword that had somehow appeared in his hand. Clara scrambled backward, her heart pounding as the room erupted into chaos. The battle was fierce yet surreal, wood clashing against claw, the air filled with the high-pitched cries of the mice. Despite his wooden frame, the Nutcracker fought valiantly, his every move precise and calculated. Yet the Mouse King was cunning. His strikes aimed to exploit the Nutcracker's stiff movements. Suddenly, the Nutcracker faltered, his sword catching on a loose floorboard. The Mouse King took his chance, lunging for the tree. Clara, without thinking, grabbed a heavy book from a nearby table and hurled it with all her might. It struck the Mouse King square in the chest, sending him reeling. The Nutcracker turned to her, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Quick thinking," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "But this is far from over." The Mouse King snarled, his red eyes burning brighter. "You cannot stop me, child," he growled. "Not tonight, not ever." And with a deafening screech, he and his minions melted into the shadows, leaving the room eerily silent once more. Clara's breath came in ragged gasps as she turned to the Nutcracker. His wooden frame was chipped and battered, but his determination burned brighter than ever. "This is only the beginning," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the tree. "The heart of Christmas is in grave danger. If we don't act, all will be lost." Clara nodded, the gravity of his words sinking in. What do we do? The Nutcracker extended his hand, his carved fingers surprisingly steady. We journey into the forgotten kingdom. The heart must be saved. Without hesitation, Clara took his hand. The room shimmered, the air thick with a strange, otherworldly glow. And as the first light of their journey began to unfold, Clara knew her life would never be the same. Clara held the Nutcracker's hand tightly as the world around her shimmered and warped. The room dissolved into a haze of golden light, each particle swirling like a snowstorm caught in slow motion. A faint melody, haunting and beautiful, filled the air. A song she couldn't place, but somehow knew. When the light cleared, Clara gasped. They stood at the edge of an immense forest, its trees towering impossibly high, their trunks twisting like ancient sculptures. Frost clung to the branches, sparkling with an iridescent glow, and the ground was blanketed in snow so pristine it felt sacrilegious to step on it. Beyond the trees, a faint light pulsed, as though the heart of the forest itself was alive. "This is the forgotten kingdom," the Nutcracker said, his voice quiet, reverent. "A place that exists between dreams and reality. Few ever find it, and even fewer return." Clara shivered, not from the cold, but from the sense of profound stillness that enveloped them. It was as though the forest were holding its breath, watching their every move. "Why is it forgotten?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Nutcracker hesitated. "Because it is a realm of memories, those too painful or precious for the world to hold. Time flows differently here. The heart of Christmas was once kept safe in this place, but..." His voice trailed off, the crack in his jaw shifting as he clenched it. "But the Mouse King found it," Clara finished for him. She glanced at the trees, their branches casting long, claw-like shadows across the snow. "Is he here?" The Nutcracker's wooden face was unreadable. "Not yet, but his presence lingers. Come, we must hurry." They stepped into the forest, the snow crunching softly beneath their feet. Clara felt the weight of the tree's gaze, as though the entire forest was alive and aware of her. As they walked, the path twisted in strange ways, sometimes narrowing to a tunnel of frost-covered vines, other times opening to vast clearings where the snow sparkled like diamond dust. The air was filled with whispers, faint and fragmented, like the remnants of forgotten songs. At one point, Clara paused, her breath catching. In the hollow of a tree, she saw a tiny figure, a doll no larger than her hand, its porcelain face cracked and its dress tattered. It looked at her with eyes that seemed far too alive. "Nutcracker," she said, pointing. "What is that?" He turned, his carved features darkening. "A memory guardian," he said. "This realm is full of them, remnants of lives long past. They are harmless, unless provoked." Clara swallowed hard and quickened her pace. leaving the eerie dole behind. As they ventured deeper, the whispers grew louder, taking on a melodic rhythm. Soon, they reached a glade where the snow was undisturbed, and in its center stood a single ornament, a silver bell, its surface polished to a mirror-like shine. It hung from a delicate thread of ice, swaying gently despite the still air. The Nutcracker approached cautiously. "This is the bell of hidden paths," he explained. "It will guide us to the heart, but only if it deems us worthy." "How does it decide that?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "By testing us," the Nutcracker said simply. He reached out and struck the bell with his wooden hand. The sound that followed was unlike any Clara had ever heard. A resonant crystalline chime that seemed to ripple through the air and into her very soul. The forest responded immediately. The trees groaned and shifted, their branches weaving together to form an archway that glowed faintly. The Nutcracker stepped back, his face solemn. "The path is open, but be wary. Every step forward brings us closer to danger." They stepped through the archway and into a new part of the forest. Here, the air was colder, biting at Clara's skin despite her coat. The trees were different too, their trunks blackened and twisted, as if burned. The whispers had grown louder, almost accusatory. Clara's steps faltered, and the Nutcracker placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not listen to them," he said firmly. "This place will try to deceive you, to make you doubt. Trust in yourself." Clara nodded, though her heart raced. She could feel the forest pressing against her mind, filling her head with half-formed thoughts and fears. As they walked, the light ahead grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. But with it came the unmistakable feeling of being watched. They finally reached the edge of a frozen lake. The light they had been following reflected on the ice, its source hidden somewhere beneath the surface. The Nutcracker knelt, studying the lake carefully. "The heart of Christmas lies beyond this point," he said. "But so does the Mouse King's influence. We must tread carefully." Clara gazed at the ice, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Somewhere in the distance, a faint laughter echoed, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. The Mouse King was close, too close. "Are we ready for this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The Nutcracker stood, his wooden features set with determination. "We have no choice," he said. "The heart is calling, and the shadows are gathering. There's no turning back now." With that, they stepped onto the ice, the next chapter of their journey beginning beneath the watchful eyes of the Forgotten Kingdom. The frozen lake stretched endlessly before them, its surface glistening like a sheet of fractured glass. Every step Clara took sent echoes rippling across the ice, as though the lake itself were alive, feeling her presence. The Nutcracker led the way, his movements purposeful but cautious. His wooden hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the shadows that danced along the edges of the lake. The light they had been following grew stronger with each step, pulsating beneath the ice like a buried star. But the closer they came, the heavier the air felt, pressing against Clara like invisible hands. A faint mist curled along the surface, swirling into shapes that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Faces, claws, and teeth. "Stay close," the Nutcracker warned, his voice low and firm. "The Mouse King's influence grows stronger here." Clara nodded, though her legs trembled. The whispers from the forest had followed them, growing louder, more insistent. They didn't form words, but carried the weight of unspoken fears, twisting her thoughts. She clutched the Nutcracker's arm. "I can feel him," she said softly. "He's watching us." The Nutcracker's wooden face was unreadable, but his grip on his sword tightened. "He wants you to feel that way. Fear is his weapon, Clara. Do not give it power." Suddenly, the ice beneath them shifted with a groaning sound, as though something massive stirred beneath it. Clara stumbled, her heart racing, but the Nutcracker caught her arm and steadied her. Ahead, the mist thickened, obscuring the path. The glowing light pulsed faster, almost like a heartbeat, drawing them deeper into the frozen expanse. Then, out of the mist, the fortress appeared. It rose from the ice like a jagged wound, its walls made of blackened stone veined with frost. Towering spires jutted into the sky, their tips crowned with icicles that glittered menacingly. Shadows moved within the walls, faint, darting shapes that seemed to flicker like candlelight. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The air itself seemed to hum with malevolence. "This is it," the Nutcracker said, his voice tinged with both resolve and dread. "The Mouse King's lair." Clara swallowed hard. "It looks alive." "It is, in a way," he replied. "The fortress feeds on despair. It twists reality to keep intruders from reaching the heart of Christmas." As they approached the gates, Clara noticed they were adorned with carvings of mice, hundreds of them, their eyes gleaming like tiny rubies. The gates swung open with a creak that echoed across the lake, as though welcoming them inside. The Nutcracker drew his sword, the blade catching the faint light of the glowing heart. They stepped into a vast hall that seemed to stretch forever, its walls lined with frozen statues. Clara shuddered as she realized the statues weren't carved. They were people, their faces locked in expressions of terror and anguish. Icicles hung from the ceiling like jagged teeth, and the floor was slick with frost. Somewhere, deep within the fortress, came the sound of laughter, low, mocking, and undeniably the Mouse King's. "This place is wrong," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's unnatural." "That's because it's built from his power," the Nutcracker said. "The Mouse King doesn't create, he corrupts. Everything here is a reflection of his greed and malice." As they moved deeper into the fortress, the air grew heavier, making it difficult to breathe. the walls seemed to shift, closing in one moment and expanding the next, as if the fortress were trying to disorient them. Clara clung to the Nutcracker's arm, her heart pounding with every step. At last, they entered a cavernous chamber, its walls covered in frost that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room stood the Mouse King, his crown tilted at a crooked angle, his red eyes gleaming with malice. He held the heart of Christmas in his clawed hands, its light dim and flickering. "Ah," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. The little soldier and his human pet. How predictable. The Nutcracker stepped forward, his sword raised. "Release the heart, Mouse King," he commanded. "This is your final warning." The Mouse King threw back his head and laughed, a sound that echoed like shattering glass. "Final warning? You're as deluded as ever, Toy Prince. The heart belongs to me now. Its light is mine to extinguish or twist to my liking." Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "Christmas isn't about power or greed. You'll never understand it." The Mouse King's eyes narrowed, and he bared his teeth in a snarl. "And what do you understand, child? That Christmas is a fairy tale, a lie told to comfort fools? Let me show you the truth." He raised the heart, its dim light turning a sickly green, and the chamber erupted into chaos. The walls seemed to dissolve into darkness, and the floor cracked beneath their feet, revealing an abyss that glowed with eerie, shifting colors. Shadows poured from the cracks, twisting into monstrous forms that surrounded Clara and the Nutcracker. The Nutcracker stepped in front of Clara, his sword flashing as he slashed at the shadows. "Stay close!" he shouted. "This is only the beginning!" Clara nodded, her fear giving way to determination. The heart was so close, its light flickering like a dying ember. They couldn't let the Mouse King win, not now, not ever. Together they braced themselves for the battle to come. The chamber was alive with darkness. Shadows writhed across the cracked floor like serpents, hissing and snapping with teeth formed of blackened ice. Clara clung to the Nutcracker's arm, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the cold clawed at her lungs. Before them, the Mouse King loomed, his crown glinting with sickly green light. He held the heart of Christmas aloft, the crystal trembling as its once brilliant glow dimmed further. "Such fragile light!" the Mouse King sneered, his red eyes glowing like embers. "You fight so desperately for it, yet it falters so easily. Tell me, little soldier, do you still think you can protect it?" The Nutcracker stepped forward, his wooden frame stiff but unyielding. His sword gleamed with a faint silver light, a stark contrast to the darkness around him. "You may shroud this place in shadow, but light will always prevail," he said, his voice ringing with defiance. The Mouse King laughed, a deep, hollow sound that reverberated through the chamber. "Bold words for a broken prince," he snarled, his tail flicking with menace. "Come then, show me this light of yours." With a flick of his claw, the shadows surged forward, their forms coalescing into monstrous shapes. Wolves with eyes of fire, serpents with scales of frost, and winged beasts that swooped low, their talons scraping against the icy ground. Clara screamed as one of the creatures lunged at her, its jaws snapping inches from her face. The Nutcracker leapt between them, his sword slicing through the shadow like a beam of moonlight. "Clara, take the bell!" the Nutcracker shouted, his voice urgent. "It's our only chance!" Clara's gaze darted to the silver bell hanging at her side, its polished surface reflecting the chaos around her. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the weight of its power heavy in her grasp. "What do I do?" she called, her voice shaking. "Ring it," the Nutcracker said, parrying another shadowy strike. "It will amplify the heart's light, but only if you believe." "Believe in what?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of battle. The Nutcracker's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "In hope, in joy, in Christmas." Clara hesitated, the bell cold against her palm. Around her the shadows closed in, their forms twisting into new horrors. The Mouse King's laughter echoed in her ears, mocking and cruel. "You cannot win," he sneered. "This place is mine. This heart is mine." But as the shadows grew darker, Clara thought of the light. She thought of the warmth that had filled her home on Christmas mornings, the laughter of her family, the songs sung by candlelight. She thought of the Nutcracker, his unwavering courage, and the kindness in his wooden eyes, despite the weight of his curse. And she thought of the heart, not as an object, but as a symbol of all that Christmas stood for. With a deep breath, Clara rang the bell. The sound that followed was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was not just a chime, but a melody, pure, resonant, and filled with light. The chamber shook as the shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke. The heart of Christmas responded, its dim light flaring back to life. The sickly green hue melted away, replaced by a radiant gold that filled the room with warmth. The Mouse King shrieked, his claws clenching the heart in desperation. "No!" he roared. "This cannot be!" The Nutcracker seized the opportunity, charging forward with his sword raised. The Mouse King turned to face him, his teeth bared, but the Nutcracker's strike was swift and true. The blade met its mark, shattering the crown from the Mouse King's head. The crown fell to the ground with a deafening crash, its once gilded surface cracking like brittle ice. The Mouse King staggered, his form flickering and fading. "You cannot win," he rasped, his voice growing faint. With one final despairing cry, he vanished, his shadow melting into the floor. The heart of Christmas floated free, its golden light filling the chamber. The Nutcracker stepped back, his sword lowered, and turned to Clara. "You did it," he said, his voice soft with gratitude. "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "We did it." As the heart's light grew brighter, the chamber began to change. The frozen walls melted away, revealing the soft glow of a starry sky. The statues lining the hall thawed, their expressions of terror giving way to relief. Clara felt the weight of the bell in her hand grow lighter before it disappeared entirely, its purpose fulfilled. The Nutcracker turned to Clara, his wooden frame glowing faintly in the heart's light. "It's time to restore the heart," he said, "and time for me to fulfill my promise." "What promise?" Clara asked. But her question was cut short as the heart's light enveloped them both. She felt herself lifted, weightless, as the world around her dissolved into golden radiance. For a moment, there was nothing but the light, and then silence. When Clara opened her eyes, the golden light had softened into a warm, gentle glow that wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. She stood in a vast, star-filled expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly, the air shimmering as though infused with the essence of light itself. Floating before her was the heart of Christmas, its radiance pulsating like a living thing. Each pulse seemed to resonate within Clara, filling her chest with warmth and a sense of profound peace. Beside her, the Nutcracker stood tall, his wooden frame illuminated by the heart's glow. But as she watched, a transformation began. His carved edges softened, the painted lines on his face giving way to the contours of flesh. The crack along his jaw disappeared, and his stiff movements grew fluid. In moments, the Nutcracker was no longer a wooden toy, but a young man, a prince, regal and kind, with eyes that shone like polished amber. Clara gasped, You're human again." The prince turned to her, his expression both grateful and somber. "The curse is broken," he said, his voice now warm and rich. "Thanks to you, Clara." "I didn't do it alone," Clara replied, her gaze drawn once more to the heart. Its light seemed to grow brighter, filling the space with a profound stillness. "The heart of Christmas is whole again," the prince said, stepping toward it. "But it still needs to be returned to its rightful place." Clara hesitated. "What happens if we don't? Can't we keep it safe here?" The prince shook his head. "The heart doesn't belong to any one place. It is the light that unites all who celebrate Christmas, the joy, the hope, the love that binds us together. Without it, the season fades into shadows." Clara nodded, though her chest tightened at the thought of letting go of the magical journey she had shared with the Nutcracker. No, the prince. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked softly. The prince smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Our paths crossed for a reason, Clara. And even if we part, the bond we share will remain. That's the magic of Christmas. It never truly leaves us." With a deep breath, Clara stepped forward. Together, she and the prince reached out, their hands touching the heart. At their touch, its light intensified, enveloping them in a brilliance so pure that the stars around them seemed to fade. Clara felt the light course through her, a sensation of warmth and renewal, as though every joyful memory she had ever known was awakening within her. The world began to shift again. The stars dissolved into golden ribbons, the ground beneath her feet solidifying. She blinked, and suddenly she was back in her living room. The Christmas tree stood before her, its ornaments glistening with newfound luster. The Nutcracker toy lay on the floor, but this time its carved face bore a soft smile, the crack along its jaw completely gone. Clara knelt and picked up the Nutcracker, her heart heavy yet full. She glanced around, half expecting to see the prince standing nearby. But the room was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling, and the first light of dawn painted the world in hues of gold and pink. Her family began to stir upstairs, their voices carrying the sleepy warmth of Christmas morning. Clara smiled, clutching the Nutcracker close. The heart of Christmas had been restored, and though her adventure had ended, the light of the season burned brighter than ever within her. As the day unfolded with laughter and joy, Clara felt a quiet certainty that the prince's words had been true. Christmas wasn't just a single moment, it was a light that connected them all, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and love could prevail. And as she placed the Nutcracker gently beneath the tree, she whispered, "Thank you," knowing that somewhere the prince was smiling too. And so, the heart of Christmas continued to shine, its light touching the lives of all who believed, ensuring that the magic of the season would never fade.